Hi again then guys, and welcome to already the second to last review from the latest batch of cars to come to the game, at least for last month, the 1.25 patch. Of course now itself already succeeded by the relatively minor 1.26 update, which was more of a fix thing, of course, rather than bring in new features. And I didn't want to end my coverage of the pack with this car because it doesn't really feel like that kind of vehicle. It's not bad enough to finish with, and it's not interesting enough to finish with. So of course tomorrow we'll be capping off my whole series of tunes and reviews for all of the cars with a very special one. Of course, the Ford Mark IV, which incidentally I finally bought today. Of course it took me a bit longer because I bought the Daytona as well last week. So now we'll be able to fully close off all of the new cars with, again, a tune and a review. Now speaking of my double feature for each car, which we've done every day so far, a tune for the car and a review for it, be it a drift tune, circuit tune, whatever the case may be. For this one today, if you didn't watch that tune already, you won't have seen that I mentioned that this car actually surprised me. And it surprised me in a way that, well, as the name surprising suggests, I didn't expect at all, because this is the kind of car which you go into expecting certain things, based on its look, based on its track record, based on its specs certainly, because just like other small hot hatches like the Fiat Panda 100 HP, the Suzuki Swift Sport, various others that are or aren't in the game, they have a similar kind of layout and a similar kind of purpose. They are small, affordable city cars, but they're the hot performance version of it. In effect, kind of like Europe's answer to the K car, but without as heavy a restriction put on it. And as such, I fully expected this car would be an outstandingly good N100 contender. Why wouldn't it be? It's already in the slightly higher spectrum of N100. It's certainly not like the Beetle where it struggles to compete. It's already got 133 horsepower, 133 foot-pounds of torque, both of which are really good from a 1.4 turbo engine. And although it's not quite as lightweight as you might expect it to be, it actually weighs more than 1 metric ton, 1,035 kilos, compared to, well, quite a lot less for some others. For instance, the Panda 100 HP that I mentioned, of course that isn't in the game, but that's only, what, a 950-ish kilo car, so even that, a fellow Fiat, is lighter than this one. You'd probably assume that this would be around, say, 970 kilos, something like that, but no, it's a little bit more, and it's always been a great rival to stuff like the Mini Cooper as well, that same kind of cute but fast approach to a smaller hatchback. Now, the reason why the car surprised me is because of the culmination of everything that I just said. It's small, it's cheap, it's got a pretty good amount of power but is still in a low category, it's not as light as you might expect but it's certainly not heavy. All of these things put together would naturally make you assume that it would be a great rival in N100 to pretty much anything else, especially hot hatches, but also certainly some classics, some K cars, some detuned sports cars like the Peugeot RCZs. But that's the funny thing, because of course in my tune I mentioned that it wasn't good at all. At least around Dragon Trail I tuned it to the peak of N100, and it was pretty much the slowest of all the cars that I've done an N100 tune for. It was even slower than the Honda Beat, which was previously pretty much the slowest. Now, I'm not talking about stuff like the Samba Bus and the Beetle in there as well, I'm talking about ones which actually can win races. So against stuff like the Copans and the Honda S660s, especially something like that, which is in the higher end of the spectrum as far as N100 goes, this actually doesn't stand that much of a chance. It was around a second to 2 seconds to 3 seconds or even more, in some cases slower than those cars. But then of course I retuned it, and I tuned it instead of to the peak of N100 to the peak of N200 with over 240 horsepower, reduced the weight as well to around 900 kilos, which is arguably what you'd hope it would be to begin with, and the difference was massive. And it's very interesting to see, and this is an obvious thing, but it's always cool to see it in action, where there are certain cars, and it doesn't matter what kind of car it is, it could be a hatchback, an SUV, a sedan, a supercar, literally any car. When it comes to tuning, there will be that certain sliver of the category or market that the car is in whatever game it's in, where everything will fall exactly into place. And you just get this instant feeling that this is where the car is supposed to be. The exact right amount of power, the perfect amount of weight, the perfect level of performance. And when that happens en masse, that is when you find these cars that the whole community uses, which become known as OP. Something like the Porsche GT3, or the Beetle Group 3, or the Alfa 4C, or the Honda S660, where they become better than they should be, or better than you would think they would be, more accurately, within their respective category. And although technically speaking you could tune each of those cars to be much faster than that particular class that they're known for being OP in, that's not what you do with it. You tune it to where it's the most effective, and every single car in every single car game that you can tune in has that sweet spot. N200 is the sweet spot for this Abarth, because lower than that, it's just not good enough. Higher than that, it's not good enough, and yet the sweet spot of 240 horsepower with just over 900 kilos is perfect, because the front wheel drive combined with the weight, the power, and the relatively compact proportions mean that it's essentially like a little cup car. And somebody actually mentioned that, of course, on my tune for it as well. Very similar to a cup car tune, similar to a cup car's performance, like the Micra cup car, the Lupo cup cars from Gran Turismo's past. Just like those, it's not going to worry that much in a straight line, but the average speed through corners, especially on technical circuits, is really good. And in the case of this car in particular, of course, it's so good that it was even quicker, as I said in my tune video, than the Alfa Romeo 4C tuned again to the peak of N200. Now that Alfa Romeo is a 90,000 credit car that weighs less than this, has essentially the same amount of power due to the regulations, is mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, which is far more performance efficient for that kind of performance than something like a front-engine front-wheel drive hot hatch could be, or should be, and yet this was around 2 seconds quicker. That Alfa Romeo is not a slow car, and neither is my tune for it. It's a tune that is pretty successful, it's got plenty of views, plenty of good feedback, and yet this, after one lap, was quicker. So the inherent potential is shown. It didn't feel that fast, but it simply was, because that, for this car, is the sweet spot. And although I've never been a particular fan of the Abarth 500, I am much more of a fan of the Panda 100 HP, which is featured in barely any, if any, games, unfortunately. I can certainly see why people would like this one. And I would again say that in a similar way to some other cars that we've talked about recently, this has definitely benefited from the new N-Class system. It makes it far more useful than it ever was in GT6, because in GT6 it was decent. You could tune up the visuals, you could tune up the performance, but it was never used that much by me or many other people that I saw. It wasn't particularly dominant at anything, and yet now look at it. It's great in N200. I'm not going to say it's the best thing out there, of course, but it's got potential, that much is for sure. Being able to beat something as good as an Alfa 4C shows the potential that it has, especially when you're paying less than 30 grand for it. Literally 1/3 of the price of the Alfa Romeo. So overall, although in amongst a pack of Daytona Cobras and even classics like the Mini, which are coming to the game for the first time in the case of that particular model, or something like the Ford Mark IV, they're all more exciting than this one, and I specifically said that this was probably the car that I was the least excited about out of the whole pack. But it's cool to see that even something like this, which I wasn't excited for at all, can still surprise me. And that's a cool thing, because regardless of whether or not I'm a fan, the point of these reviews is to shed light on cars and benefits from said cars that you can glean. That is definitely the case here. It's better than I gave it credit for, and it feels more useful than ever now in this game. But that's it for this pick overall. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.